Hello students, welcome back. Most of you might have siblings. Have you ever wondered why the other person looks similar to you or why different from you? You might be aware that the characteristics are passed down from parents to offspring. This is called inheritance. Inheritance is the basis of heredity. However, the offspring might not be identical to the parents. They differ from their parents even though they share some common characteristics. This degree by which the progeny differs from their parents is called variation. The subject that deals with inheritance as well as the variation of characteristics from parents to offspring is called genetics. In this video, let's learn about the basics of genetics. It was in the mid of 19th century that humans have some understanding about the basis of inheritance. For that, we should be thankful to Sir Gregor Mendel, who conducted hybridization experiments and proposed the laws of inheritance in living organisms. He conducted his experiments in 14 true breeding pea lines. True breeding pea lines means those plants have undergone self-pollination and show a common characteristic or a particular trait is inherited for several generations. A characteristic that is passed on to generations is called a trait. For example, let's take two plants with red flowers and allow them to self-pollinate. The offspring we get will also have red flowers. If we continue the self-pollination for several generations, then the offspring will yield only red flowers, right? This is called true lines. The same trait is inherited through several generations. He cross-pollinated tall plants with short plants, the plants with axial flowers and the plants with terminal flowers. He cross-pollinated the plants with purple flowers and white flowers. Then green pod color with yellow pod color. He cross-pollinated the inflated pod shape with constricted pod shape. Then cross-pollinated the yellow seed color with green seed color plants. Then the plants those have round-shaped seeds with wrinkle-shaped seeds. Let's understand more about the experiments that Mendel performed. Mendel selected one pair of true breeding plants for his experiment. One of the traits he selected was the height of the plant. He cross-pollinated a tall and a dwarf plant. The offspring of this crossing were called F1 generation or filial progeny. Filial means nothing but the offspring we got after crossing. Mendel observed the first generation plants. To his surprise, it was all tall plants. There was not even one dwarf plant. That means neither of the offspring expresses the trait of one parent, that is the dwarf plant. Then Mendel self-pollinated two tall plants from F1 generation. The offsprings produced as a result of this self-pollination were called F2 generation. In F2 generation, the offsprings include 3 tall plants and 1 dwarf plant. The tall and dwarf traits were identical to the parents. That means all the offsprings were tall or dwarf. Neither of them were of in-between height. Thus, we can say that in F2 generation, the traits are expressed in the ratio of 3:1. That means 3 tall plants and 1 dwarf plant. Based on his findings, Mendel proposed that something was passed on from the parents to offspring through the gametes over successive generations. He called them factors. These factors are now known as genes. We are aware that genes are passed on from parents to offspring. They are the units of inheritance. Gene is a particular portion of DNA that contains the genetic information for a particular trait. Genes are present in the chromosomes. We know that there are 23 pairs of chromosomes in humans. That means we have 46 chromosomes. Out of these 46 chromosomes, 23 we get from the father and 23 we get from the mother. The genes which are present in the chromosomes are responsible for a particular trait. They are different forms of a particular trait. For example, eye color is a trait. If your father has brown eye color, the gene we inherit from father will express brown eye color. And if your mother has blue eye color, the gene we inherit from mother will express blue eye color. The eye color has two forms, brown and blue. They are called alleles. The kid will inherit each one from the parents. But as brown eye color is dominant, this kid will have brown eye color. We will discuss more about the dominant factor later in this video. Alleles are slightly different form of the same gene. In Mendel's experiment, the tall and dwarf plants are different forms of a particular trait, that is the height. These two forms are known as alleles. We inherit two alleles of the same gene, each one from father and mother. Now we know that one gene has two alleles for a trait. We can express it with alphabets. For example, for the tall plant, we can write capital T, and for the dwarf plant, we can write small t. There are two alphabets for one trait as we have two alleles. Mendel selected homozygous parents for cross-pollination. Homozygous means the alleles are identical. Here you can see the brown eye color alleles are homozygous as both are identical. Similarly, here both the alleles are identical for blue eye color. But the offspring of that parent is heterozygous for the eye color alleles. He has both brown and blue color alleles from each parent, hence heterozygous. If the trait is written as capital T small t, then we can call it heterozygous as it has different alleles. Here capital T and small t are called the genotype and its descriptive form. That is, the terms tall and dwarf are called phenotype of the parent. Now let's perform the Mendel's experiment one more time with the genotypes. When Mendel crossed capital T and small t, that is the tall and the dwarf plants, in first generation he got 4 capital T and small t plants. This is the tall plant and this is the dwarf plant. One allele from each parent is transmitted to the offspring. These two join together and the first one and last one, then second one and first one, second one and last one. Thus he got 4 capital T and small t plants. Even if the genotype has small t in it, all the plants were tall. Mendel explained this as if there are two dissimilar factors, one dominates over the other. The dominated one is called the dominant factor and the other one is called the recessive factor. Here capital T is dominant and small t is recessive. Can you recollect, in previous video we discussed that even the child has both brown eye color and blue eye color alleles. The child's eye color was brown. That is because brown eye color dominates over the blue. Here capital T is dominant and small t is recessive. That is why even though the genotype was capital T and small t, the plant became tall. Now let's see what happened in F2 generation. Here these two were allowed to self-pollinate. When the tall and the dwarf plants produce gametes by the process of meiosis, the alleles of the parental pair, that is these two alleles, they separate and segregate from each other and only one allele is transmitted to the gamete. This segregation is a random process and it has 50% chance that the gamete contain this allele or this allele, that is a capital T or small t. This capital T from one plant, that is the pollen, and the capital T from the other plant, that is the egg, unite to form the zygote, which have capital T and capital T. This is a homozygous form as it contains two identical alleles. In other cases, it is capital T and small t, which is heterozygous. Like this, in F2 generation, Mendel got capital T, two capital T and small t, and one small t and small t. Here, small t and small t was homozygous with identical factors and became dwarf. From this, we can conclude that dominant factor will express in both homozygous and heterozygous form, but the recessive factor will express only in homozygous form. Mendel got only a monohybrid cross as the parents were differing in only one trait. If the parents are differ in two different traits and are heterozygous, then we can call it a dihybrid cross, which we will be discussing in our future videos. The production of gametes by the parents, gamete formation, and the F1 and F2 generations can be easily demonstrated by a diagram called Punnett Square. It was developed by a British geneticist, Reginald C. Punnett. By this diagram, we can calculate the probability of genotypes of the offspring. This is a square and we are dividing it into columns. On one side, we will write the female gamete, which are represented by this symbol, and on the other side, we will write the male gametes, which are represented by this symbol. Now, let's write all possible combinations in the columns. From this, we can conclude that all the offsprings are tall as they are heterozygous with the dominant T factor. Now, F1 offsprings are allowed to self-pollinate. Let's draw a Punnett square for that too. In F2 generation, let's write all the possible combination. These are the female gametes and these are the male gametes. And let's write the combinations. Here the phenotypic ratio is 3:1 as 3 tall plants with 1 dwarf plant. The genotypic ratio is 1:2:1. 1 tall plant with capital T and capital T alleles, 2 tall plants with capital T and small t alleles, and 1 dwarf plant with small t and small t. Mendel then self-pollinated the F2 plants, and in F3 and F4 generations, the dwarf plants generate dwarf plants only, and they are homozygous for the alleles. That's it for today's video. If you like this video, please share it with your friends. If you have any queries, put it in the comment box. Thank you.